Now, how this works in terms of a scientific model, if you just in case you need pictures, or is key to helping us understand how media and society interact. So we'll start here. These are not models of mass communication. There are several different type models of mass communication. You see them all here. The one we're going to focus the most on is that one there at the top, which is called the transmission model, also known as SMCR. SMCR standing for source, message, channel, receiver. Basically, a source sends a message over a channel to a receiver. That's sort of like saying to play the flute, you move your fingers on one end and then blow on the other. It is obviously much more complicated than that. And since this model was not originally designed for mass communication, a bunch of other thinkers have added to it. So move on to a slightly more complicated model. Model starts with a source. In most cases, it's a human having a thought. That's intrapersonal communication, what we talked about earlier. A thought that stays in your head obviously is not mass communication until others hear it. And it doesn't do the world any good until it is encoded into a message. The message can be encoded using symbols, which are letters or images or sound that somehow have a meaning. That usually involves some type of a device, a camera, a keyboard, turntables, etc., to encode that thought into a message. How that message is encoded depends upon the source, which is you, the communicator, your knowledge of the topic, your culture, your attitude, and your skill. All these things play a role in the choices you make. Think about what stands between you and successfully transmitting a message to your mass audience. This model, in case you haven't noticed, is in Thai. If you don't speak Thai, you won't be able to communicate what's on this to a mass audience. How you craft your message depends on how much you know, how well you are able to turn your thought into a message that others will understand. Culture plays a role, obviously. In the South, we have words that aren't used as much in other parts of the nation, and vice versa. If you call something a buggy and I call it a shopping cart, do we at least understand that we're talking about the same thing? So, as you create your message, you have to make several decisions. The content. What exactly are you trying to say? The code, which is the symbols, the letters or images or sound that somehow have a meaning. Treatment, which is the arrangement or ordering of the content by the message. Are you going to tell this story as a just the facts message? Do you tell a story with characters and plot? In what order do you place the content? All of us have been involved in some type of a situation, maybe a class, maybe just having to listen to a story from your friends, where all you can think about is why won't this person get to the point? You've been thinking about this every time you write something for a class, or send a text, or make a film, or have to deliver good or bad news to someone. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she thinks about this type of thing. She'll walk into a room to deliver a message. She's already thought about how she's going to deliver that message. Usually it's with some sort of opening line like, I have to tell you something important. And then it turns out it has something to do with her doll's hair. When you've made all those decisions and you've encoded your intrapersonal communication, that's when you've created a message. Even as you created that message, however, you have to be thinking about the communication channel you plan to use to transmit your message. The terms channel and transmit sound like broadcasting. Think about them in a wider context, if you will. The channel, in many instances, is the device that you use to send the message. Sometimes that can be broadcast, it could be print, it could be video or film. And the message, in part, is shaped by the channel. As we'll talk about later, the channel you choose will affect the message's content and meaning. That's because different communication channels are better for different senses your receiver might use or need to use to understand. Print is really good for delivering information. Sound and video are better for emotion. So you have to think about these things as you're crafting the message. You have to figure out how you're going to get that message out. More channels obviously means more clarity. When we talk about communication channels, we need to talk about how they're different and how to choose the right communication channel that will do what it needs you to do. There's a researcher named David Berlow who talked about something called fidelity. Fidelity is the idea that the more channels you have, the clearer your message will be. If you're looking, for example, at Seth Meyers in this GIF file, he's probably has a different meaning than the actual words that came out of his mouth. If I get a message from my wife saying that my dog has torn up something in the den, and I respond, "That's great," with a frowny face, maybe you know I'm being sarcastic. If you hear me on the phone saying, "That's great," and stretching it out and sounding whiny, you may know better that I'm being sarcastic. If you see me roll my eyes and scrunch my nose while I say it, then you've got a much more rich message. The richer the message, the better. The less noise in the message, and the more appropriate the feedback. Back to that SMCR model. If you're the source and you encode the message and you send it over the channel that you will think will provide the most fidelity, the next step for that message is to be decoded by the receiver. A newspaper story doesn't do any good until someone reads it. A TV show is not good until someone's seen it. A song is no good until someone hears it. Once the receiver has decoded the message, the receiver internalizes it into a thought. How the receiver does that depends on the receiver's knowledge of their culture and their attitude and their communication skill. That reception model may play a role here. We meant one thing, but the message is understood in a different way. If all goes well, the original thought of the sender becomes understood and shared by the receiver. Maybe that receiver will be motivated to action. Maybe they'll buy your product. Maybe they'll write a letter to the editor, or go to the meeting, or be persuaded and laugh at the right time. But as we've noted, the process is complicated. Sometimes the process doesn't work. Your message can be misunderstood or ignored. When a message is not understood, there is not shared meaning.